never changes.
Welcome back, friends, to another episode of Lore Watch. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused friends from Blizzard Watch, and I have got my stupendous wasteland wandering friend, companion. I don't know what skill check you would really require to interact with you, but Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm trying to figure out. I was like, special. Which are the special? I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Perception? Oh, no, that derailed the entire show. Joe would pay for having asked that question.
I will eventually. But we are here to talk again about Fallout, which should be no surprise to anyone. We talked about the game Fallout 1, last week in our last episode, or depending on when you're listening to this, I'll just say last episode. And we left off with basically leading right into Fallout 2, and it pretty much is a great place to kick off. If you have questions for us, or if you have a topic or something you want us to cover, like these Fallout series, go ahead and send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify that it's for us. Give us any special pronunciation of your name if it's there, and we would very much like that. If you want to hit us up on Discord, you can hit us up on the Discord. We have a podcast and Q questions channel. It's free for everyone. Just if you're part of the Discord, you can go ahead and ask in there, or give us a topic or something that you want us to cover. If you're a Patreon subscriber, however, we have an extra bonus for you. Not only can you find all of our content early in advance on Patreon, but you can also submit questions or topics or, well, pretty much anything you want us to cover in our Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is our patron Q and Podcast Questions channel. We look there first. It's a way of saying thank you for all of your support. So when last we left off, we were basically the hero of Vault 13, if I remember correctly, and we had just decided to go out into the wasteland, and, we wasn't really decided by us. We weren't allowed back.
In quotes.
We decided, in quotes, the Overseer wouldn't let us back into the vault, so us and a bunch of people that didn't really like that whole thing, we went forward and settled our own, town, a primitive town. So why don't you give us the openings of it, Matt? Because I think it takes place in, 2241? So it's several generations.
Yeah, I think it's between 20 and 40 years before New Vegas, which is itself about 10 years after Fallout 3. Not that you need to know that, but, my brain requires me to establish these.
And it's 80 years after the first game, I think?
It is about 80 years. What ends up happening is you start playing as one of a member of a group of tribals. Tribals is what they're called. People who start their own groups or tribes, whatever word you want to use for it, are called tribals. And they're people who have essentially said, no, we're not going to live in a vault, whether they just never got the chance to live in a vault or if they've left a vault. But either way, they've left a vault or not gone to one, and now they're out in the wastes just living. And sometimes these areas turn into full-fledged towns and communities. But sometimes, like in the case of Arroyo, which is where the game starts, it's more of a small enclave of associated friends and family. And the town of Arroyo in this case is really only about a couple hundred people strong. And like I said, mostly a group of basically the people who left Vault 13 and the people that they met who were wandering the wastelands together. And they founded Arroyo, and then 80 years passes and you're up to them having a bunch of grandchildren. Their children have had children at this point, and you play as a character who is going through an initiation rite along with other members of the tribe, which ends up with you succeeding at it and becoming essentially what you're called by the rest of the game is the Chosen One. And you're not the Chosen One because of anything else, of the fact that they chose you. It's specifically your grandmother, who is the daughter of the original Vault Dweller, chooses you. And it's implied that you're not the only one who can say this. You're not the only one who is the grandchild or great-grandchild of the original Vault Dweller. He was there for quite some time. He basically founded the community, led it for many years, and then one day he left behind his vault suit and the modifications he'd made to it during the events of Fallout 1, As you know, like we talked about last time, Fallout 1 had a lot of events to necessitate modifications of one's vault suit, and he went forth to do whatever. No one knew what happened to him after that. He left, and his family continued the traditions, and Arroyo grew up. But they are kind of tired of living in a horrible radioactive wasteland, and it's getting hard to like feed and sustain as many people as they currently have. And so they've decided to try for something that the original Vault Dweller left behind as a possibility, something he was interested in but didn't have time to really look into, and that's called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit,
or a GECK.
Or
you may be familiar with this if you play any of the other Fallouts or Fallout 76.
Yeah, the Garden of Eden Creation Kit is, to break it down really quickly, it was created by a Stanislav. I can't remember his last name, and he's one of the big characters of Fallout. What is Stanislav's last name? Braun? Yeah, Braun. Stanislav Braun.
Yeah, it was from Future Tech, so it would have been Braun. Yep.
Yeah, and he'll be coming up again. Let's just say that Stanislav Braun has a long reach in Fallout, despite the fact that we've never met him in the flesh. We come close to it, but we never actually meet Stanislav Braun physically. But regardless, he created the Garden of Eden Creation Kit to hopefully repair the wasteland after the war. Basically, the idea was that the kit would be included in a vault, and when a vault decided, okay, it's livable out there now, they deploy the GECK, and it would basically, I don't have a better word than terraform. It would terraform the wasteland back to something that humans could make use of. That was the goal.
That was part of the Societal Preservation Program, which was part of Vault-Tec's, one of their I guess, I don't want to call it contingency plans, but I'll just say a plan. It was one of the plans that they had before the bombs dropped, was, well, if the bombs are going to drop at some point, we need a way to essentially reclaim land, reclaim society, which is where Stanislav Braun came in, because he was the director of that Societal Preservation Program. And it is a fully self-contained terraforming module, so like it is very, very, very powerful. The interesting thing is that knowledge of it has we're reaching the point of a post-apocalyptic future where things are sort of moving into myth and legend and reverie. So when you hear about the GECK, it's not just like this scientific marvel. No, it's the holy GECK. It's this thing. Go ahead.
Like Joe mentioned before, this game starts in around 2240 or so. The bombs dropped in 2076. So it's been over 170 years by the time this game starts. And there's very little continuity between the past and the present. I mean, it's not like you can go on the web and check Wikipedia for information about the pre-apocalypse. Yeah. There's nothing like that. You can't, and there are libraries and stuff, but they're few and far between. Many of them got destroyed.
And as we found in the first one, some of the libraries are used as base of operations where even if they have any of the knowledge that's preserved, it's incomplete, or the books are faded or missing pieces of it because, again,
they got bleached by bombs
radiation
going off,
or sun or whatever.
Left to like rot for 70 years. Like, you go ahead and take a box of like 30 books, put it outside in the rain, and leave it there for 10 years. How many of them are going to be readable? And so there's a lot of different things along those lines.
And if you've played other games too, just to comment here, this is one of the reasons why, like, as you're playing through later games like Vegas or
3 and 4, even
3, 4, you'll find audio logs, but you'll also find data tapes. And data tapes have information on them, not a lot of information usually, but it's also a key point that will come back later on, especially as we start getting into Fallout 4 in particular. So
getting back to it, they've decided that, the Holy GECK, as Joe pointed out, they need one. They need to find it. Vault 13 should have one. And while they haven't heard anything from Vault 13 since their ancestors left, they figure, you know what? Maybe if we appoint you and we put the suit on you, maybe you can get in there. Maybe they'll let you in and you can find out where the GECK is. If they haven't already used it. And if they have used it, You know,
One thing I do want to point out is part of the reason that the Gek is even interested is because the Elder, which is, again, as Matt pointed out, a descendant of the Vault Dweller, read a hollow disk advertisement from her father, and that's how they know the Gek existed.
Like this wasn't something he knew about as a resident of the vault. Because as Joe pointed out last time, the Overseer sequestered information quite effectively in Vault 13. In most vaults. Some vaults weren't that way, but most of them were. The ones that were even capable of sustaining life for any period of time. Regardless, you then are given this task. So with your ancestor's gun and suit and your own dog, because I'm positive it can't possibly be the same dog, and if it is, what the heck? Anyway, sorry, little thing for Fallout, the TV show there. You are then sent forth to find out, whatever happened to the Gek. But as much as that is the through line of the game of the story, that's why you leave Arroyo. It is ultimately Fallout 2 is the start of a sub story that will carry itself forth into each following Fallout game.
Yeah,
and that story is, in my opinion, that story is the Enclave.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where, like, we talked about the Enclave a little bit, but this is that seed, right? This is the seed where the Enclave is so much more. Matt talked about this last time. It's a paramilitary organization and quasi-state that is supposed to be, it's a War America deep state type thing. I don't know how else to really put it. So, like, they have this really sort of, like, radical political and military organization that thinks that it's the direct continuation of the United States and its government, and wants to essentially go forth and reclaim the United States, but does so in questionable ways. So, like, this is a pervasive, constant thing that you find throughout all the rest of the Fallout games, and you get a lot more of it, I think, in 4 than you do in. Surprisingly, like, I would have expected more of it in 3, but that's a story for the next time.
Well, I mean, okay, let me put it this way. I think you get a lot of backstory on it in 4. They are actually involved in 3. You see them in 3. You fight
That's
them
true.
in 3. And they're actually involved in New Vegas a surprising amount. Not directly, but their legacy. And you run into their legacy quite frequently. Up to and including possible actual members of the Enclave. But regardless, in this game, the Enclave is basically, this is the first time that they're seen in the wasteland in California. This doesn't mean they haven't been present in other places.
Well, it is also important because we talked about this last week. One of the things that did happen with the Fallout, the Fallout from the first game, is that the new California Republic has also been born in this time period, like over these years. So there is a direct opposition to the Enclave. Please continue. Yeah.
Basically, the way the Enclave was born back before the war, you had a bunch of people, including members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a couple of previous presidents, and possibly the current one. It may have been a running thing that each new president got introduced to. Other people like scientists who won the Nobel and so forth. Rich people, like, for instance, it's hinted at that the guy behind Nuka-Cola, Brad Burton, was at least quasi in the Enclave. If he wasn't actually a member, he knew them. He knew the people that would go on to found it. And it's also implied pretty heavily that Mr. House from Fallout New Vegas also had connections with them, and also had connections with Vault-Tec.
Which is why he was situated like he is, which we will talk about when we get to Vegas, because he is a very fascinating character. Yeah,
but it's also... It's the Enclave has connections with Vault-Tec, but they're not part of Vault-Tec. It's more like they recognized what Vault-Tec was doing, and a lot of the people who are in the Enclave were taking steps of their own, if that makes sense. One of the things that they did was basically decide, look, nuclear war is inevitable. We've passed the point where this can be stopped, and they'd had this. You'll meet this computer in actually Fallout 4. They had a computer from the Department of Defense that it was basically just a giant AI, and it was kind of a nascent AI. It wasn't like fully fledged, but it was basically a probability cruncher. And it kept doing the probabilities on when war would become, when war was going to happen. And the probabilities went from 25% chance, 35% chance. During the invasion of Anchorage, they spiked to 75%. When the Chinese invaded Anchorage and then American forces went up to Alaska and took it back, that spiked it up to 75% when the Chinese invaded. When the Americans took it back, it went up to above 100%. And that's when they knew, we are going to have this war. It's going to happen. And the basic thing was that all of the numbers suggested that it would happen by 2280. Or not 2280, by 2080. But it happened in 2076. No, it was 2077. In October of 2077, it happened, which was ahead of the calculations. So the Enclave wasn't ready for it yet. They had already set up various locations, and one of them is very important to this game. But for example, there's a oil rig off the coast of California that becomes one of their emergency fallback stations. And when the war happens, there's people on that oil rig who are essentially cut off from the rest of the world. And one of them is the president of the United States at the time. Like, that's where they moved him. So from that point of time of that war happening, up until the quote-unquote present of 2240 or so, the Enclave has basically been reaching out to reconnect to all the other Enclave stations throughout the entire country. And as a result of that, they've kind of gotten to the point where they feel like, okay, we can move back onto the actual continent. We can move back and start taking control of territory. But then, as Joe pointed out, the new California Republic starts up. And the Enclave is like, wait a minute. Against a bunch of tribals and isolated vaults, no problem. But an organized state with its own military? And keep in mind, too, that in the original Fallout game, that's like 80 years previously. That's the foundation, the original starting foundation of the new California Republic is 80 years before this game, which means that the NCR has 80 years of running up and organizing and getting more people to join and centralizing its power.
I think it's closer to 60 years. I don't think it's 80 years. But regardless,
still, this is all stuff that the Enclave was not ready for.
Also, to keep in mind that the new California Republic was getting technologically advanced to the point where it either was rivaling or had surpassed the Brotherhood of Steel.
Yeah, in fact, to the point where the Brotherhood of Steel went to war with them at some point.
Yep.
And lost. The new California Republic, one of the things that I think fueled their growth, and I don't know if it's ever strictly speaking said, but the fact that the Vault Dweller discovered and then later on turned over the Mariposa military base, combined with the fact that the new California Republic started in what is often called the Boneyard, which is really close to where the followers of the Apocalypse and therefore all of their libraries and so forth started. And that has effects in Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas we'll talk about. But essentially, they had working technology from a Vault City. They had that. Which meant they had the ability to read data files, widespread. They didn't just have to run them one on a Pip-Boy at a time. They had terminals. They had the ability to manufacture things because, again, Vault City had a fully fledged machine shop in it. They had that, and they had the wherewithal to use all of it because they had people throughout the entire area of what was once California, and then later on out into Nevada.
Yeah, because at this point, the new California Republic was comprised of 5 city-states, I think, right at this point. So, which, they had additional territorial holdings up through Oregon, Nevada. Like, they were not a small organization. This is what we look to when people say, in Fallout, I'm surprised that larger organizations didn't happen, or why are people in like Diamond City as opposed to reclaiming the whole of Boston or being more organized. This is what happened. Like, the new California Republic, because they had access to, one, more resources than most of these other places, two, the knowledge and the people spread out throughout all these facilities and all these regions, and three, like Matt pointed out, access to an extremely advanced military base that had, again, prior to this, been doing genetic modification and creating super mutants but that wasn't the only thing that it was capable of
No,
doing.
it was a heavy weapons research facility. They were the T-60 set of power armor, which you start seeing in Fallout 4. And I'll tell you right now, this is a retcon.
Mhm.
I am not going to argue about that. I am fully aware that this is a retcon. But in that retcon lore, the T-60 comes out of Mariposa. Mariposa, there's the reason that there was an entire army division in power armor that normally would have been used up to fight up in Canada. And then instead of using it there, they put it in California where it wasn't really necessary, except it was necessary because they needed to defend that base. Because it wasn't just FEV, it was all sorts of stuff going on in that base. So yeah, there's actually a ton of stuff going on in terms of the New California Republic's ascension. And it had started really rising in 2198. Not 2198.
2189.
2189 is when it's founded, but 2198 is when they selected Shady Sands as their capital.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, 12 years
Yeah.
after the first council was formed.
Yeah. So the Republic was founded then about a decade, 10, I think 12 years. What I can't remember exactly, but they then found Shady Sands, and Shady Sands is already pretty big because it's built around Vault 15. Like Vault 15 is underground. Vault 15 is the technology that they then use to access the Mariposa technology that they then use by 2241. They've got something like 40,000 people, and by 2281 they've got 35,000 people. So 4,000 people, 35,000 people. Now that doesn't sound big to us, but post-war, those are big towns, and they grow slowly. And that's so in a way, this is the fastest that any society that we currently know of in Fallout grows, and it throws the Enclave off because the Enclave is expecting to ride into California and basically mop up a bunch of people like the people in Arroyo, but that's not what they get. That's not even close to what they get. They get the NCR with the NCR Rangers. And the NCR Rangers are basically like if you took the Texas Rangers and the Army Rangers and made one organization out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they are built on the same, they're basically built out of similar people as the Brotherhood of Steel. Some of them are some of the Brotherhood of Steel defectors helped form the NCR Rangers. Because for a while there, it's looking like the Brotherhood of Steel and the NCR might work together. Like they're getting closer and closer to possibly doing it. And then the Brotherhood recently realizes, wait a minute, if we let these people have this much technology, they're going to completely just start using it. And we can't allow that. So that's when they go to war. But they lose. That's more important to the plot of Fallout New Vegas.
Yeah.
But it does have impact on Fallout 2 as well. Because when you run into the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 2, they are essentially on the back foot. They're like, yeah, sure, we've got these power armor suits, but the NCR knows how to fight us.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, when people are like, when you see the Brotherhood of Steel, especially if you've only played later games, or in particular if you've only played Fallout 4, you think of them as this like extreme military organization, like they're well organized. The truth is, they're actually not. They've become more of a zealous organization, as even when you reach them. That's why they call their like higher knights, although they call them knights and paladins and knights errant and elders. It's as much a social construct, as much a religion as it is a military organization. It just happens to be a religion that happens to have power armor and vertibirds and blimps.
Yeah, and also it should be pointed out too, the ones you'll see in Fallout 4 are based on the ones you see in Fallout 3.
Correct.
And the ones you see in Fallout 3 are literally the ones who got kicked out of the West Coast for wanting to use the technology more than just acquire it.
Mm-hmm.
So they got essentially invited to go explore east.
And combine that with the fact that not only the ones you experienced those ones, but here you have essentially what are military trained people in the New California Republic, like Matt's pointed out, Army Rangers, Texas Rangers, even Wilderness Rangers, which don't discount them, because those Wilderness Rangers are like what you would expect or think of like the D&D Rangers. They know the terrain, they know how to deal with the flora and fauna of the area, because there is still like You go out into the deserts, you're not alone. There are tons of irradiated and mutated creatures out there, especially with the FEV running wild, because the FEV has been running wild. You're going to come across Deathclaws. You're going to come across Rad Scorpions. You're going to come across, and let me tell you, I think Rad Scorpions are actually scarier than Deathclaws, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, but also like to move on to something else here, so we don't spend all this time talking about it. No, it's fine. We do have to talk about the NCR. The other thing the NCR has that other factions like the Brotherhood of Steel don't is that while they aren't thrilled about it and they don't always act the best towards it, they do not shoot ghouls on sight.
Mm-hmm.
They do not automatically assume a ghoul is hostile. And if you're not hostile, they'll let you alone. And what does that mean? That means that pre-war ghouls can actually contribute their knowledge of the world before to the NCR.
Which is invaluable.
Because they're the ones who are like, no, do it like this. See, log you in. They're the ones who are explaining, oh, no, this won't work. We don't got satellites anymore. This used to work on satellites. You don't know what satellites are. All right, we used to have rockets that we put up in the sky. Stop looking at me like that. This is how it worked. And those things would tell us down here what was going on over there because they could see it. And, all of that kind of stuff they had access to. In a way, this is one of the weird things about Fallout, if you really think about it. The Fallout series is actually very optimistic in a way.
Yes.
Because it postulates this horrible thing happening, but then it postulates, but yeah, we could make it back from that. Kinda. I mean, it's not going to be great, but people will build things. People will build towns. They'll build communities. And in a way, humans won't really let the fact that they blow up the world stop them from killing each other. They're not going to hold us back from what we are, which is horrible and scary, but also kind of uplifting. As you're the chosen one and you go forth from Arroyo out into the wasteland, you are kind of a blank slate. You know even less about the world than your ancestor did.
Mm-hmm.
He at least knew about the vaults as someone who'd lived in them. He at least knew about the world before. You only know whatever weird legend your grandma tells you about, as Joe pointed out, we only know about the Gek because there was an ad for it that she saw when she was a child. And she was a child living in a cave, because her dad basically got kicked out of his homeland for saving it. So yeah, a lot of myth and legend involved in what your character understands about the world. And so when you go forth out into the areas of California in Fallout 2, you run into all these different factions. You can run into the Brotherhood of Steel. You can run into the NCR. You can work with or oppose them. There's a criminal town, I want to say Hub City, but maybe it's not Hub City. Maybe it's further south.
I think it's further south.
I think it's New Reno.
Yeah.
New Reno is where all the Joe talked about it last time. There was the caravan people and the slavers and gun runners. At this point they're opposed directly to the NCR because the NCR wants to grow and expand. And if they grow and expand, they'll create their own distribution networks. They'll create like we do. And they're not going to need rogue caravanners to run stuff between all these little towns if they are all of the towns,
which also
and that's
results
what they're turning into.
Yeah, as I was going to say, the other thing too is New Reno becomes its own little thing, which feeds into Vegas, but is a place in Fallout 2 where it's essentially turned into what you would expect. There is no government there. It's very much run like a crime syndicate family, conglomeration. Mm-hmm. There are no police. There is no order, in a traditional sense. All the families sort of keep things running.
Yeah. And they each have their own, essentially they all have their own goon squads.
Yep.
You can think of it as private military. You can think of it as, private, cops, but it's basically just each group has their own muscle. But so as you're going through all of this, while you're doing all this, you're trying to find the Gek, but you go to Vault 13 and there's nobody there.
Yep.
It's abandoned except for rad scorpions. Joe's now hiding. And big radioactive rats and a bunch of really messed up robots. And you're like, what happened here? And depending on how what you've specialized in, what your attributes are, you can essentially work out some or all of what's happened, which is that somebody showed up in a vertibird. They sent the all clear signal. So the overseer, whoever it was at the time, because again, it's been 60 to 80 years, the overseer opens the door, and then a bunch of people get shot.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones who don't get shot get taken. And where do they get taken? Have we mentioned Mariposa military base? These guys have gone in force and seized control of Mariposa military base. Why are they doing that? Because that's where the FEV tanks are.
And because this wonderful group of people, which we know as the outside observer is the Enclave, needs people to test on. And why do they need people to test on? Because the FEV is ever evolving and they want to know what they can do with it, because they needed two groups of folks. They needed a control group, people who were untainted, and that happens to be Vault 13. Vault dwellers are essentially untainted. They haven't been living in the wasteland.
And if you live in the wasteland, you are exposed to various things. One of them is radiation. Everybody who lives out in the wasteland has been exposed to way more radiation than the average person ever experienced pre-apocalypse. And Vault dwellers are still at that level.
Yeah, and
secondly, there's FEV everywhere.
Yeah, and the Enclave has classified all humans who are not Vault dwellers as subhuman mutants, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because they've got FEV in them, even if they hasn't turned them into a super mutant. Because FEV mutates so quickly, there are strains and strains and strains of it. And most of those strains don't do anything as far as we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
But they do mutate you. They do mutate you to be better at surviving radiation. They just don't do it in the super mutant way. And we know that because of... I'm trying to remember how they exactly remember this. They do know this, but I don't remember how. Oh, right. Because they've actually got people. Like, there's a person in the Enclave named Frank Horgan. And he works for the Enclave. He's a Enclave soldier, but he's been exposed to FEV. And he's a super mutant. But he is a super mutant, complete retention of his personality and self. Just like the Master super mutants were. But the super mutants you meet in Fallout 2, a lot of them don't retain themselves. And that's because of the FEV degradation. There are various stages of it, going all the way from, big green guy who's, completely articulate and intelligent, which is what Horgath is, but still has all the, radiation resistance, is 8.5 feet tall, can basically shrug off small arms fire sort of guys, all the way down to the ones that are like barely even coherent and, are even insane because they've been exposed to electromagnetic radiation that kind of drives them nuts, down to people who you don't even see any signs that they have it. Most people in the wastelands have a strain of FEV because it's everywhere. Yeah,
it's very similar to like if you're coming into this early and you've watched or read The Walking Dead, where there's that basically what makes people zombies when they die is sort of in everybody. That's kind of how it is. Like it's just a natural state of the world because it's been just everywhere. But I think Matt is right that the most interesting thing is that so many of the strains just do nothing,
or at least nothing that you can immediately
nothing that we
detect.
can perceive. Yeah.
Yeah. There's certain fan theories, and one of them I kind of agree with that imply that there's a strain of FEV that is essentially the super soldier serum.
Yes, I agree with that, which is why like you as in a protagonist in many of these games are capable of doing things that you should not be able to do.
Not even close. I think that the games that really make it the most clear are New Vegas and Fallout 4.
I would agree with that. Yeah, 100%. Because Fallout New Vegas, you get shot in the head and you live.
Yeah, they just dig you up, pull the bullet out of your head, and you're fine.
Which we'll talk about that more, but that's everybody knows that because that's sort of like that's big hook of it.
Of the game. Yeah. Literally, that's the first 5 minutes of the game. Hell, I don't think you actually ever play your character before that.
You don't.
Yeah, you play your character upon waking up, and you're told, "Oh yeah, I dug you out." So yeah, in this game, in Fallout 2, you then basically spend a lot of time. You're still looking for the GECK because you still need it. Your people need it. You need to get the GECK. But then it shifts into, okay, I got to stop the Enclave. And one of the things I love about Fallout...
There's another part of this you're missing, though, because where do you go after you find Vault 13?
Yeah, I know. But I don't... I'm going to ask you, beg you here, don't spoil the big twist as to what happens in Arroyo, okay? Because I want to tell that one.
Go for it. Just do your thing.
All right. Joe's going to come back and tell you the other places that you go. But what ends up happening that I think is very important is why the Fallout 2 does something that a lot of games at the time didn't do, in that it advanced the story regardless of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Like in most games of this type, keep in mind that this is the time that Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 are the biggest games in the world for this genre of game, for the isometric role-playing game. Fallout 2 has you doing what you're doing to try and figure out what's going on and stop it. And then when you go back home to Arroyo, you find that everyone in Arroyo is gone.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get to. Yeah.
When you go back, the game is like, oh, hey, you know that time you spent in the wasteland? Yeah, your people got kidnapped while you weren't there. And now, keep in mind, it doesn't actually matter if you go right back to Arroyo immediately or not. This will still happen. But it's set up in a way that it feels like the game is reacting to you. The world is reacting to your actions elsewhere. You've kicked the Enclave like kicking a hornet's nest, and in response, they've come to your home, which I think is one of the best things about the game, is that it makes it so much more personal. This isn't you fighting the Enclave because they're bad people doing bad stuff. This is you were looking into the bad stuff, but then they went and took your people because your people are the other side of the control group that Joe was talking about. The Vault Dwellers in Vault 13 are completely unexposed. The people in Arroyo are just 3 generations removed from them, but have been exposed. So by studying the two groups, you can see, oh, this is how it went. This is how it changed them. This is how it moved. And that makes both of them useful for the Enclave's experiments, because the Enclave is intending to use FEV on the entirety of New California. They're going to just hit everybody with it, because the only people they care about are themselves. The people who've been born, have grown up and lived within Enclave bases are the only real people as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, I mean, that I think is one of the more interesting things is like you find, when you find that out, that is sort of like Matt said, that's the big twist. That's the big, I don't want to say reveal, but it's what sort of denotes the next chapter of the game, the next act. And going back to something that Matt said earlier about the game sort of proceeds without you, it does. And the only time you really see the consequence of your actions or choices that you make is with the game's endings, of which I think there's like 15 with some sub-variations.
There's at least that many.
Yeah. There's 15 major ones, and each one of them has sub-variations. There's a lot of stuff that choices you make will impact the ending, but there are sort of things that are canonically established as we move on. Mm-hmm. But I will say that there are a couple things. Like one of the things I think was interesting. Do you want to talk about Vault 15?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big part of. Do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it?
Go for it.
All right. Vault 15 is a big part of why the NCR exists. The people of Shady Sands are directly related to the people of Vault 15. They're essentially their children and grandchildren, because Vault 15. I'm trying to think of how exactly to put this. Vault 15 originally was set up. The people there left in like 2095, 2090. I can't remember what year.
So before we get into the one thing, Vault 15 was set up, just for context here, as a social experiment by Vault-Tec to be the largest mix of radically diverse ideologies possible within a population, in order to try to gain data on how society would potentially break down over the 50 years that the vault was planned to stay sealed.
Yeah. And keep in mind that it closed in 2077, because that's when they all closed. That's, they entered the vault on October 23rd. They entered it. It was sealed. And then things started going really bad, because first off, the thing Joe just said about the diverse populations with completely different ideologies, but also there was no birth control of any kind.
Yeah, they didn't, like other vaults had population control in order to keep resources within reason. No, not here. So
by 2097, Vault 15 was significantly overcrowded. People were fighting. There was the sense of, oh God, we're all going to starve to death. Why haven't we gotten the all clear signal yet? And then in 2097, I think 2097, yeah.
2097.
basically the people of Vault 15 said, F this. Some of them fought their way through the security, popped the door open. The majority of the population just said, we're going. And when the Vault Overseer tried to stop them, they literally just pushed them out of the way. And they left, and they grabbed their Vault's Gek and took off.
Well,
the people...
I was going to say, the Gek is what we find out was used to create Shady Sands.
Yeah, exactly. They grabbed the Gek, and they took off. There were some that left and stayed. There were some that stayed inside Vault 15. We'll get back to what happened to them. But the rest of them kept going until they found Shady Sands, the area where Shady Sands would be, and they used the Gek to build it. And then the ones that couldn't make it in Shady Sands for whatever reason, they were, because they were so ideologically different or what have you, started other tribes. And some of those tribes were raiders.
So if you encounter the Khans, the Jackals, and the Vipers,
yeah,
those started as people from Vault 15.
And those people are really good at crime. The Khans in particular have a pretty big footprint. Not just in Vault, they're not just in Fallout 2. They come back in New Vegas, and they're mentioned in 4 because it's almost like they're a society of their own, completely opposed to NCR, which of course makes sense because the NCR is essentially built out of Shady Sands.
Mm-hmm.
And what's left in Vault 15 afterwards. When the NCR founds, originally Vault 15 is left just alone. But the independent salvage teams that were going in forced the Republic's hands, and the Republic essentially said, "No, we're going in. We're going in, and we're basically looting the thing." And they excavated it. They took as much technology out of it as they could. Then it collapsed, and because they dug it out too much. And then a bunch of wastelanders ended up squatting inside Vault 15. And this is all stuff that you experience when you go there as the chosen one, and you go to Shady Sands and so forth. And you run into President Tandy, of all people. President Tandy is a fascinating character because she's the daughter of Aradesh, who you meet in Fallout 1, who is living in Shady Sands at the time. And Tandy is his daughter, and Tandy is essentially helped by your ancestor, the Vault Dweller, and you help her now because you go into Vault 15 and you get the computer parts, and you manage to make a deal between the NCR and the squatters in the vault, which essentially lets the squatters and the NCR make a deal where the squatters get to be protected by the NCR, and the NCR gets access to the technology that they failed to excavate when they collapsed the place. This essentially means that if you do this, if you take this quest and do this story, you are directly involved in the NCR moving into the wastes north of its current territory, which means Fallout 3 happens because of you. Like, there's no Fallout 3, or that's more important. Yeah, no Fallout 3 because there's no Brotherhood of Steel, in anywhere in DC, and there's no Fallout New Vegas because that expansion north is what leads them directly into Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is the kind of thing you get over and over again in Fallout 2, is you have opportunities to do things, and you are free to take them, but you are also free to not take them. And it will change not just how the game ends, but it'll change how the game plays out. Like, when you go back to Arroyo and find your people gone, who are your friends? If you've been playing this with not making any friends, not making any connections, then you're essentially going to have to try and find a way to get to first Mariposa and then the oil rig by yourself. And if you have been making friends and allies, you might have a suit of power armor for yourself because the Brotherhood of Steel would have taught you how to use it. You may have NCR Rangers and so forth on your side. You may be going into that oil rig with a lot of backup, or you may be going in entirely by yourself, depending on how you've played the game. And that's just one of many, many things that's, to my mind, absolutely fascinating about Fallout 2. It is my favorite of the Fallout games. This is not to say, I often say it's the best, but that's the kind of thing you say because, we're all nerds and we kind of like picking fights with each other about story.
Yeah.
But the story of every Fallout game has something for someone. But what I like about Fallout 2 is how expansive it is.
Yeah, like I want to talk about that because we're running a little low on time here, and I want to get to the endings and stuff like that. But Fallout 2 is one of my favorite Fallout games as well because of this. we talked about how Fallout 1 sort of established the roadmap for the world. It was essentially the outline for the world building that would come to pass. And it was one of those things where you could very much tell that it was a first game. They didn't know how successful it was going to be, but they had a very clear vision in mind for what the story was going to be. But they built a world. They didn't just build like, here's point A and point B and point C, and that's all you get. Once you get to the ending, you're done. It was, no, here between point A and point B, here's all these little sub points. Here's all this tiny little world building that they do to establish the lore of Fallout, what the rules are. And then Fallout 2 comes along and it says, we know exactly what we're going to do here because, heck, we're making a second game. But we're not just making a second game. We're taking that roadmap of lore and we're expanding it out. And we're making all of these factions have depth and breadth. And we're making the world feel lived in and evolved. Because that's one of the things that this game did that sequels weren't really doing at the time it was released, which was evolving the world. The story continued. And it wasn't just a tactical shooter. It was very much an RPG, and it very much had those roots with it. And as you move through Fallout 2 and you make your way to the ending, you make your way through all these connective points, while we talked earlier that the game continues without you despite your decisions, it does, but when you get to the end, you start to see all these seeds that get planted, all these things that will come back later on as, you know, expansive points that other games build on. So I guess, is there anything else you want to talk before we talk about the endings, Matt? Anything that you think is really important?
Not so much that the world goes on, you know, despite you, so much as it goes on. If you decide not to participate in something, things still happen there.
Yeah.
Because what happens is it's almost like Fallout 2 is set up with a story that is going in a direction, and then your character is introduced and they can play as much or as little a part in that story. And by doing so, change the direction of it. But the world isn't dependent on your character to exist.
Mm-hmm.
It was there before you got out of Arroyo. It'll be there long after you're gone. The Wasteland is, in a way, it's similar to what we talked about with Night City in Cyberpunk 2077. The Wasteland exists, and it is not just the place where one person has one life. It's the person where all these different people have to come to live in and experience and explore and try to find a way through. And so I think that's a good way to lead into the various endings, because there are so many of them, and I won't even pretend that I've seen all.
We're going to go through is we're not going to go through all the different endings because there's a lot of them. And when I say that there was 15 endings with different subsections, there are 40 or 50 different endings that could theoretically happen as a result of your choices. I'm just going to go through some of the canonical ones here that establish stuff later on. So first is that, and I think this is a really bold choice for them, but makes a lot of sense. If you do basically nothing special, you get the default ending, which is the canonical ending, which is you go and you fight and destroy the Enclave. And I'm air quoting around destroy here. Very big air quotes. You get your hands on the survivors of Arroyo and Vault 13, and you build a new community with the aid of the GEC. You find yourselves hundreds of miles from the Vault, and the Vault dwellers choose to join you in establishing this community. Their technical expertise, combined with the villagers' survival skills, allow them to the new settlement to basically grow and prosper. And then 2 generations of the same bloodline were reunited, and the Savior, the Chosen One, became the Elder after your Elder, the one that had chosen you, peacefully passes away. This is again the canonical ending that they established. The other things, and Matt can stop me at any point whenever you want to interject here. There was a confrontation between the MODOK and the Slags that you encounter at some point, where basically the MODOKs it's a group of folks that are essentially trying to sustain crops with the drought, and then the Slags, which were underground cistern dwellers, were essentially not working with them, come to blows. The canonical ending is that you establish peace. And this is how the West Coast eventually continues to flourish, because without them finding a way of peace, without them finding a way to get those crops growing, the people of that sort of the West Coast don't survive. There is no future. So it is what they chose to be the canonical ending there. There's a whole thing we talked about with the bishop. We didn't talk about with the bishops.
Yeah, we didn't.
Where
They're a crime family. They're one of the crime families.
They are a crime family that one of the things that they ask you to do is help them father a child, or help them essentially become pregnant. The ending is that the bishop child is actually born, and that the bishop child takes over New Reno essentially as the figurehead, but isn't able to defeat the rights, which are a whole other thing we didn't get in there. But then New Reno joins the NCR, which is a really important thing as part of the canonical ending goes, which directly feeds into New Vegas and some of the hostilities that are there. Let's see. I believe there's
multiple Vault City ones.
There's multiple Vault City ones, which I'm trying to remember exactly what happens there, but
as far as I remember, the canon Vault City one is that they join the NCR.
I think that's correct, because Reading joins the NCR as a canonical ending as well, which is a very important part, because that is with this is after you buy the excavator chip and you do a whole bunch of stuff that helps people with mining and getting resources. Again, it comes back to that resources. They decide to join the NCR. The Broken Hills peacefully disperses, which is basically mutants versus mutant haters kind of battling each other out. But it's because it's a uranium mine, which everybody wants uranium because I guess this Fallout, you want your nuclear materials. Peaceful dispersion of everybody going their own ways as soon as uranium runs out is the canonical ending. It turns it into a ghost town, but all the people go one way, all the mutants go the other way, which establishes why there's so many mutants all over the place. Marcus, which is a super mutant that we interact with, is alive during the game. And he just basically travels east, which will come in later on, because, again, Fallout 3, Fallout 4 take place on the East Coast, directly feed into this. The NCR becomes the dominant power of the West Coast. So Vault 15 launched the new California Republic's push to civilize its neighbors. Basically, you help them sort of overcome whatever obstacles are and bring all these disparate areas, states, people, groups into one banner, which is what establishes that power base that we will see in Fallout New Vegas. I believe that is all of the canonical endings, but this sets the stage for basically every other piece of expanded game storytelling that will come. It establishes everything that you're going to experience in Fallout New Vegas. It experiences a good chunk of the reason behind the things that you are going to experience in Fallout 3, and tidbits that sort of bleed over from all of those into Fallout 4, especially the stuff with the Enclave, because that's one of the interesting things. The Enclave is sort of like an ideal or an idea that, while you air quote destroy it, isn't actually gone.
Yeah. There's a foreign thing. There's like lots of places throughout the former America where the Enclave has bases. And those bases were essentially military equivalent of vaults. And one thing to point out, too, that I think is actually pretty important is that some of the stuff from games that were considered non-canon is now sort of becoming canonized.
Mm-hmm.
And that also includes stuff that was in games that didn't even happen. Fallout New Vegas canonizes some of the stuff that was going to happen in the original draft for Fallout 3. Because Fallout 3 was originally going to be done by Black Isle and Interplay, the people that did Fallouts 1 and 2, but Interplay basically died. And as a result, the people from Interplay went to various places, and one of them founded Obsidian, which was the game company that made Fallout New Vegas. So when they did New Vegas, they took their old design document for Fallout 3 and made as much of it as they could canon, which is where we learn a lot of the stuff about New Reno.
And there's stuff that also comes from the unofficial third game that never happened as well. That's starting to become canonized a little bit. I believe it was called the Van Buren game, the codename Van Buren, that never got established.
I mean, that's what I was just talking about.
Oh, is that it? Because I thought
that's Van Buren / Jefferson. Yeah, that's the one I was literally just talking
Sorry.
about. No, I wasn't talking about Fallout Tactics. Fallout Tactics deserves its own episode if we're talking about stuff that has been canonized, decanonized, and recanonized.
Mm-hmm.
Fallout's, the thing about the Fallout universe is no matter who's currently in charge of it, it never throws anything away. Because in a way, it is with its lore, the way the people in its world are with just everything they find. You can't afford to throw out working technology in Fallout. It doesn't, and you can't afford to throw out perfectly solid world building in Fallout. Even if it's not used in the current game, you're never going to completely toss that. You're going to keep it in your back pocket.
Here's one of the cool things about that too, is because of recent stuff, and maybe this is something we'll talk about on Tavern Watch. Maybe I can even get people to play this game because I have it. It's a very nice game, and it came with bottle caps because they're currency you use in the game. The stuff that they didn't use in the video games, but couldn't find another place for, they put it in the tabletop RPG. They gave Modiphius the ability to take those lore tidbits and weave them into the tabletop game for players to sort of experience and flush out and sort of sink their teeth into, which I think is really cool because Matt said, you just don't throw anything out.
Yeah. And the other thing before we move on, because I know we're running low on time here. The one thing about Fallout 2 that I really want to stress, but the thing about its lore and its storytelling is that it is comfortable with going from grim survival stories of, nuclear apocalypse to in-joke festivals on the drop of a dime that no other Fallout game is quite as comfortable with. Some of them try. I will say that Fallout New Vegas is probably the closest, but no other game, not even the first one, is as comfortable with just crazy things happening. And then you go back to the story like you didn't just see that. Was that a dinosaur? There is an element of stuff that doesn't make any sense can happen, and you have no idea what it was because it doesn't make any sense to you. You don't, you haven't got the slightest clue how that happened, and it just sits there, and there's no explanation of it, which is something I think is pretty unique to Fallout as a setting. They are very comfortable with stuff that never gets solved.
Yeah, and because they have done that thing that Matt and I have talked about a lot, which is it can lead to a later payoff because it doesn't have to be solved. It can just be a thing that exists in the world. The
Mysterious Stranger.
The Mysterious Stranger or the aliens. Because
the aliens.
every single Fallout game has some reference to aliens in it. Whether you find a blaster, you find a cave, you find a ship, whatever the case is, there's always a reference to it. There's also a lot of references to Cthulhu-esque dark gods that have not had any payoff yet.
No, but they pop up very big in Fallout 3. New Vegas has remnants of them.
Ooh,
Fallout
the house.
4 has,
the house.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo, we're going to get there.
Yeah. Fallout 4 has I would say it's more than Fallout New Vegas, but less than Fallout 3.
Agreed.
But there's really you can't do a Fallout game set in Massachusetts.
Yes.
And not make at least one or two references.
And the interesting thing is it's a sci-fi game, but they establish for the presence of potential magic and otherworldly powers, because could it be when we could talk about the Mothman and stuff like that as well, because that exists in the Fallout universe. That is a thing that canonically exists, is the Mothman. It could be cryptids that never existed before that were just, popped up as a result of the FEV and people's imaginations, or it could be something that always existed before, and now just because humans are gone, or because monsters and I don't want to say magic are the norm, but monsters and science experimentations everywhere are the norm. Two-headed stags are going to be everywhere. The Brahmin are everywhere. This is not the old world anymore. These creatures, these entities, feel more comfortable just being out in the wild because, one, humanity is a shell of its former self population-wise. They don't have to worry about that much. And two, well, you don't have a whole lot of automatic weaponry anymore. So it's a little bit safer for them to be out and about, but they're not afraid to lean on those things. They're not afraid to acknowledge those and weave them in and sort of like either hat tip to them or outright put them in as like a key element.
Yeah.
There's a quest we will talk about. I think it's in Fallout 4, the art gallery.
Oh, yeah, Pikmin's Gallery.
Pikmin's Gallery, which really sort of drives that home in a very weird way.
Yeah, it's a very, like I said, they can't do a game in Massachusetts without making at least a couple of references. The other reference they make is one that's really interesting in terms of possible consequences for Fallout as a whole. And I can't remember the name of the family, but they've got essentially the father of the family, they've locked him up in a mental asylum because he's completely and totally like sociopathic. He doesn't care. He'll cut people into little pieces just to look at their innards. But he's got some kind of device or artifact on his head, and it's been interacting with his body and causing his body to produce chemicals inside him that keep him alive forever. And so they've kept him alive so they can drain that fluid out of him and use it themselves. And they're all like 300-400 years old, the whole family. They don't just predate the apocalypse. They predate the Civil War, the United States Civil War. They
is this the McLean family?
Not the McLeans. I don't remember what their name is, but they're like very old Boston Brahminy, and you run into them because you actually get hired by a ghoul who's like their longest retainer because he's been alive since then too. He's basically been working for this family since before
the Cabot House.
Yes. Yeah, the Cabot House, and it's weird and trippy and pseudo-sciencey, but also pseudo-old-gaudy. And it's like, it's a REM, City of the Pillars, and all that stuff. And it never gets explained where the artifact's real. Like, it's on his head. If you let him go, he will wander around with it and use it to fight Deathclaws after he kills his whole family.
This is also where you get the Lorenzo's gun.
Yeah, if you kill him, his son will take the hat off of his head and turn it into a gun, and it's the weirdest gun. It's basically just a I shove you off a cliff gun.
It's a gamma radiation weapon, the only gamma radiation weapon in all of the Fallout lore. So, by the way,
but it also just pushes things. Like, you can use this gun to just kill people with gamma rays, which is hilarious. But you can also use it to like just shoot them off things. Like, I use it all the time to just push people off things. Like, we're up on a height, we're up on top of a lighthouse, and there's a 500-foot drop.
And I don't know if you mentioned this, but his father and that family they trapped him in that room with that device on his head in 1898.
So he's been around since, he's been stuck in that room all this time. And after the apocalypse, they kept it going just to keep him in that room. Yeah. And this is just a thing that happens.
And like I said, like, we're going to talk about that more because Fallout 4 is really full of that. Honestly, by the time we get to Fallout 4, it's probably going to be a longer episode than normal. There's just so much
it culminates
to cover.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, New Vegas might be the longest just because I think it deserves a really in-depth analysis because there's a lot going on there. But in terms of like how each game affects the preceding and next games, Fallout 4 has a callback to the Fallout 2 that involves San Francisco, which we haven't even talked about.
We haven't gone there yet. We haven't seen it. We haven't done anything with San Francisco yet, but it calls it out.
Yeah. And Fallout 2, there's a little bit in San Francisco, a little tiny bit, the Shi, they're called, are there in San Francisco. And they're literally survivors of the war, including the Chinese army that were attempting to invade via submarines as the nukes were going off.
Sound familiar, Fallout 4 players?
Yeah, which points out something that a lot of people have mentioned, that Joe has mentioned, and I think we should talk about it before we leave, is that the Americans already weren't ready. The Enclave wasn't ready. Neither was China.
Nobody was.
Which is weird, because you'd think if the Chinese dropped the bombs, they'd know they were dropping the bombs, right? But they didn't.
Yeah, so there's, and we'll get into this in a little more in depth, but people have been talking about that the Fallout TV show, they claim that it completely erases that point. No, this has been a questionable thing since Fallout 2. This has been a question that has been left as a loose end, as a thread to pull on later since Fallout 2. This is not new. Each game
has in some way.
And each game has given you little pieces of this puzzle. With
Fallout 3, Megaton.
Yes. Fallout 4, Far Harbor.
Yep.
As well as, I think there's another quest too, where you have to get the
New Vegas, everything about Mr. House.
Yeah, everything about Mr. House. Yep. So again, Fallout 2 is sort of the blossoming point of all of this, right? This is where all these things start budding off, all these stories start to really sort of take root, and where you can trace a lot of this stuff back to. And it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that these places that we go in the subsequent games are the places we go. There's a reason we go to Vegas. There's a reason we go to the DC area. There's a reason we go to Boston. Like, there's a reason even that you are in Virginia in Fallout 76 in the hills. There is a
West
reason
Virginia.
for that, right? These all stem from things that were placed into motion here. So if you only play one Fallout game of the old series, if you don't want to play Fallout 1, Fallout Tactics isn't your thing, I highly recommend you play Fallout 2.
Yeah, almost without exception, I can say that Joe is right here. If you can only play one of them,
Yes.
you should play Fallout 2. If you can only play one of the newer ones, you should probably play New Vegas.
Agreed.
And again, I like Fallout 4 better than New Vegas as a game. As a game that I'm playing, I like it better. But as a story, Fallout New Vegas dances on it with hobnail boots on.
Yeah, and not only that, like Matt says that Fallout 2 is probably his favorite game. Vegas is my favorite game, followed very, very closely by 2.
Yeah, and in my opinion, 2 is the best written story in my opinion, but Vegas is the more mature story. Vegas is the story where the stuff set up in Fallouts 1 and 2 and the stuff that happens in Fallout 3 all comes together and says, this is the world now. This is how the world changed from here to here. And now you understand how over there got to be where it is. Fallout 3 is a better game for having played Fallout New Vegas.
Yes,
because now
agreed.
it makes sense. It's like, oh, that's why there's this big Brotherhood of Steel group over there. Because the Brotherhood of Steel on the West Coast got their butts handed to them. And that's why they can do whatever they want in DC. There's nobody to stop them.
Yep.
There's nobody from the West who can say anything to them. They're busy running from the NCR. It makes sense now. And so that's one of the things that I love about these games is that the way they interact, the way they interlock almost.
Yes.
And Fallout 2 is the first one that says, okay, here's the domino we knocked down. Here's all the other dominoes that are gonna get knocked down.
For my money, Fallout is one of the most consistent story games over the years, and it's because of how these games interact and interlock. Like, again, if you want to think of it, like Fallout 1 is the one that lays the ground rules for the universe and the world that we live in. Fallout 2 takes those and says, okay, let's run with it, and puts those connecting pieces out into the world for them to come back and touch. And every game that has come out since, every game, including Tactics, butts up against that. And you wouldn't expect a game that says Fallout Tactics to have story in it, but it does.
Yeah, and the story is wildly divergent in places.
Very much so.
And it's interesting to see how it diverges. The Brotherhood of Steel in Tactics is the only Brotherhood of Steel that says, hey, super mutants, ghouls, sure. The rest of them are like, burn it. And then this one group was like, nah, they're okay. They're okay. Look how Jumbo here loves that gun I gave him. That's the cannon off of an aircraft. Yeah, and he's just, look at him. He's so happy.
Because of that, it establishes characters like Virgil later on, which are absolutely important.
Virgil, even Strong.
Yeah, strong, yeah.
So yeah, I think we've probably said enough right now. So I'll stop talking after this. But I will say this. Not only is Fallout often the most consistent, but it's also, there's a quest in Fallout 2 with a guy named Myron who creates Jet.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that nowhere in Fallout 2 does it say he invented Jet. It says he made it. He was the first person in the Wasteland to make Jet. And he made it using Brahmin droppings and other stuff, which is horrible, but whatever. People get high off of crazy things. In Fallouts 3, New Vegas, and 4, you find out that there was Jet before the war.
Yep.
But the Jet that was made then was made in pharmaceutical laboratories by sane people, and it wasn't intended as a recreational pharmaceutical. So it doesn't contradict, it expands. Like, the stuff we had before the war was intended for sale by corporations. And there's a really great line in Fallout 2 about corporations that all the next Fallout games pick up on. Like, every time a company tells you something when they're selling it for profit, guarantee it's cheap and it's made bad and it's going to break down.
Yep.
And yeah, so that's it. I think there's way more we could say, but there's way more games to cover, and I'm just going to be quiet now so we can get out of this one and then think about the future ones.
Well, hopefully that gives you a little bit of information, the nugget that is Fallout 2, and hopefully that encourages you to experience it for yourself. There's so much we couldn't cover because there's just so much that happens in this game. But Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to this podcast, better chance at having your questions answered on our podcast over the queue, and an ad-free site experience. Again, if there are specific things you want us to cover, please send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for and any special pronunciation of your name. You can hit us up on Discord in our Q and Podcast Questions channel. Same rules apply. And if you are a Patreon supporter, go ahead and toss them into our Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look for these questions and topics first. And again, I'd like to remind everybody, you don't just have to ask us questions about WoW. We will answer questions about other story-driven things. We just try to group them to make a cohesive show. So in this particular case, if you have Fallout questions, don't hesitate to send those in.
Oh, please.
We can do a post-mortem episode Q&A, and I'd be more than happy to get those together and do that, because trust me, if Matt and I are on the same wavelength with this, we could probably fill a 2-hour episode answering your questions on this.
Yeah.
But with that, folks, we'll see you next week.